Senator Ketter.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr Acting Deputy President. I rise to join this debate in relation to putting health and education ahead of the tax cuts. If I could just firstly address Senator Hanson's contribution, I think it's really important to note that she has, I think, once again, I think she may be slightly confused about the Labor position, because it's quite clear that Labor has indicated that it would support stage one of the personal income tax plan. We wanted to split the bill, and in fact the tax cuts that we wanted to introduce were actually double those that the government is proposing. So we understand that households are under pressure, and the relief that we want to provide is far more immediate and more significant than the government. But what we don't want to do is we don't want to provide relief to the big end of town where it's not needed, and it won't provide a stimulus to the economy that it's actually required at this point in time. Now, Mr Acting Deputy President, Australia is at a crossroads, and we can either become a more equal society or a less equal society. The choice is with us, and I think it is extremely important that the Australians understand this crossroads that we are at, and this is a matter of public importance. And the reason I say that is because I believe that the government is putting us in a position where their fiscal recklessness is endangering the underpinnings of our fair and equitable society. Health and education are fundamental to the support that we provide to people. It's fundamental to aspiration, and if you put those things at risk, then you are putting ultimately the stability of our society at risk. Why do I say those are at risk? Because I believe that, as other credible economic commentators have said, that particularly stage 2 and stage 3 personal income tax cuts are unsustainable and fiscally irresponsible. And you don't have to believe me when I say that, Mr Acting Deputy President. I go to the submission to the Senate Economics Legislation Committee inquiry into the personal income tax plan, and that was submitted by the Grattan Institute. I think most people would accept that the Grattan Institute is not exactly a cheer squad for the Labor Party, but they have come in with a position where they say that they are concerned about the fact that particularly stage 3 of the personal income tax plan, and I'm quoting from Mr Daly, who gave evidence to our inquiry, that 6 or 7 years is a very long time, and economically the chances of a significant economic downturn over the next 6 or 7 years are pretty large. That's the law of averages historically. And he went on to say that inherently the full package is going to cost the budget, on our estimates, a little over $22 billion in 2027-28. That was based on the PBO estimates, and $24 billion in the following year, which is 2028-29. Which he says that it does mean that the Commonwealth budget will inherently have less flexibility in a significant downturn, and it's also an issue that Australia is going to probably go into the next economic downturn with much less of a buffer than it went into the last one. So this is the Grattan Institute, as I said, not exactly a cheer squad for the Labor Party, but they have expressed their serious concerns about whether or not these tax cuts are sustainable in the longer term. Most Australians understand that when you legislate significant changes down the track, and we know that stage 3 is the fastest growing as part of the tax plan, growing at 12% per annum. When you legislate for significant tax expenditure down the track, which is going to grow at that sort of pace, then you are taking a gamble with Australia's future. And at risk here is our support for our health and education and other fundamental services that we rely on. So, Mr Acting Deputy President, I think it's now more than ever that Australians need the protection that only a Labor government can provide. Right now, our schools are under attack from this arrogant, out-of-touch Prime Minister, who's prioritising tax breaks to the top end of town over funding to our schools. And with his Liberal national colleagues, is ripping $17 billion out of schools across the country. And is it a coincidence that this figure is the same figure that relates to the amount of money that he wants to provide to his big business mates through tax breaks to the big banks? The same mates that this Prime Minister has shielded for so long, running a protection racket for the banks for 601 days before ultimately being dragged kicking and screaming to announcing a royal commission into the banks once they gave him permission to do so. And how does this Prime Minister justify his protection of the banks? How can he possibly be advocating for billions and billions of dollars in tax handouts to the banks while we're in the middle of a royal commission that's uncovering such abhorrent behaviour? And just a couple of the headlines that we've seen recently. There was a Financial Review report yesterday about how ANZ forced 162 farmers from their land after expanding into agribusiness without adequate preparation or safeguards. On the 31st of May, we saw the Sydney Morning Herald article reporting revelations that NAB took proceeds from a customer's home sale that they weren't entitled to pay down a small business loan. And on the 30th of April, ABC News, along with many other outlets, reported the resignation of AMP's chairman in the wake of the shocking fee-for-no-service scandal, a dodgy practice also employed by the big banks. And of course we know that it's not just the AMP that has to answer for this, but I haven't got all day so I won't dwell on that issue. But on the 21st of March, the AFR reported evidence that Westpac relied on verification of customer income and expenditure details by car dealers for car loans. And let's not forget the doctoring of the kids' Dolomite accounts by the Commonwealth Bank staff who are under pressure to meet incentive targets. Now, Mr. Acting Deputy President, this is just the iceberg, tip of the iceberg when it comes to the behaviours being exposed by the Royal Commission. So how can we possibly reward these very same institutions with a tax cut? Now, when it comes to the education system, we believe that it has transformative power, and I've said in this chamber before that I want to give a few examples of what these cuts mean in real terms to some of the schools in my duty electorates, and I'll mention Maranoa, where we see the Warwick State High School will lose $770,000. Warwick West State School, $440,000. Warwick Central State School, $240,000. Let's go to Flynn, currently held by Mr O'Dowd, the National MP. Gladstone State High School will lose $1.35 million over 2 years. Lewis State High School, $870,000. Gladstone Central State School will lose $300,000. Gladstone West, $570,000. Closer to my home in Brisbane, and looking at the outer suburbs, Petrie and Dixon, held by Liberal MPs Luke Howarth and Mr Howarth and Mr Dutton, respectively. Pine River State High School, $1.06 million ripped out of the budget. North Lake State College will lose $2.5 million. Dacabin State High School lose $730,000. And I want to go through what these cuts mean in the Longman electorate, which is very topical, and I have had the opportunity now on a couple of occasions to go door knocking with our outstanding candidate Susan Lamb in the seat of Longman, and we know that you don't have to talk too hard to the average voters of Longman to understand how out of touch this Prime Minister is and how out of touch this government is in terms of what their priorities are, which are twisted and so far removed from the day-to-day lives of the good people of Longman. But in Longman State Schools, we see the LNP cutting over $18 million over the next 2 years. And if I had time, I would go through that, but we can talk about TAFE and universities as well, where we're seeing $270 million in new cuts to TAFE, and the MyEFO froze funding for university places. So these are cuts that Australia cannot afford. So, and when it comes to health, there's hundreds of millions of dollars coming out of hospitals across the country. Caboolture Hospital will lose $2.9 million. Redcliffe, $4.2 million. Prince Charles Hospital at Chermside, $7.7 million. Royal Brisbane and Women's Hospital, $14.3 million. And Lady Shalento Children's Hospital, $6.5 million. So this is the example of the twisted priorities of this government. As I said, Australia is at a crossroads. We need a federal Labor government to take us in the right direction.